If, as an artist or group in the 1960s, you were given a song to record written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, you might be forgiven for thinking that success was just around the corner. But as you're about to see, that wasn't always the case. I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video I'll look at 3 McCartney compositions which, had the Beatles recorded them, may have put an end to their career.
1963.
Described later by John as another piece of Paul's garbage, Tip of My Tongue could have been the Beatles' first single. Paul presented this freshly written composition to the group during a rehearsal at the Cavern on September 3rd, 1962, the day before their first session at Abbey Road, as a candidate for the A-side of their debut single. It was a bubbly, upbeat number where the singer, although very shy, is confident that one day he'll be able to express his true feelings to his girl and marry her. In an early sign of Paul's developing skill as a master songwriter, he rhymes the last word of one line, lonely, with the first word of the next, only. However, that clever lyrical trick couldn't disguise the fact that the song itself was weak. Paul later ashamedly admitted that Tip of My Tongue was one of those songs where he'd tried to work it around the title. Nevertheless, it was added to the stockpile of ready-to-record songs, and even became part of their live set for a few weeks in September 1962. In fact, Tip of My Tongue was one of the 6 songs rehearsed at their debut session at Abbey Road on September 4th, 1962, which saw John take off his guitar and pick up a pair of maracas. On hearing it in the studio, George Martin was less impressed and diplomatically suggested that the song needed more work. But Paul didn't give up on the song, and in November put it forward as a candidate for the B-side of Please Please Me. But compared to John's finely crafted Ask Me Why, Tip of My Tongue sounded forced and naive, and in the end, the correct decision was made.
He's the man with the Midas touch.
Brian Epstein enjoyed being the man with the Midas touch, and his success with Billy J. Kramer and Jerry and the Pacemakers led him to believe that a young 18-year-old freckle-faced Liverpudlian named Tommy Quigley could also become a star. Brian had met Quigley in autumn 1962 and had booked him and his group The Challengers to open for the Beatles at the Queen's Hall in Widnes over 3 dates in September 1962. Brian finally signed him to his stable of stars in June 1963, after which he received the Epstein makeover. His hair was cut, clothes smartened up, and his name was changed from Quigley to Quickly. Brian then secured him a recording contract with Pi Records, but as a solo artist only. Brian didn't like his backing group The Challengers and thought they were ugly, and they were sacked before Quickly's signature was dry on the contract. Tommy recorded Tip of My Tongue and its Mitch Murray penned B-side Heaven Only Knows at Pi's Marble Arch Studios on July the 8th, 1963, with accompaniment directed by Les Reed. The single was released on Pi's subsidiary Piccadilly label on July the 30th, and was launched with a full-page advert in the New Musical Express, where their reviewer called it another smash hit from the sensational songwriting team of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. However, Don Nickel in Disc described it as not one of the composer's best efforts. The single didn't get much airplay either, and disappointingly for everyone, Tip of My Tongue missed the charts altogether. Despite the single's failure and George Martin's skepticism, Epstein was undeterred and was still convinced Tommy could become a star, booking him on 3 Beatles tours and even on their Christmas show. He even employed one of Liverpool's best groups, the Remo 4, to back him. But despite Epstein's efforts, nothing could get any of Tommy's 4 follow-up singles into the chart.
You wouldn't read my letter if I wrote you.
The only record that came close to giving him a breakthrough hit was The Wild Side of Life, which peaked at number 33 in November 1964. The Wild Side of Life even got a release in the States on Liberty, but sank like a stone. Brian Epstein hated failure, and his failure to make Tommy a star hit him hard. Nevertheless, he decided to roll the dice one more time.
This happened once before, when I came to your door.
Written by John in Tahiti in May 1964, no reply was offered to Tommy quickly way before the Beatles recorded it for Beatles for Sale. With nothing to lose, a recording date was set up at Pi with the legendary Tony Hatch in the producer's chair. John, Paul and Brian Epstein were also in attendance, but the session didn't go well. Upon arriving, John sent chauffeur Alf Bicknell out for a bottle of whiskey, which they all proceeded to drink during the session. This resulted in a terrible atmosphere, which proved too much for Tommy. He found it impossible to perform to anyone's satisfaction, and the session ended without the recording being completed. Finally, after doing his utmost to make Tommy a star, Epstein had to admit defeat, and he and Tommy parted ways in April 1966, marking this as one of his rare failures in the business. Disillusioned, quickly quit the music industry, and like the unfortunate Jimmy Nicol, found himself alone and unwanted. Another obscure cover of a McCartney song from this period was one called 1 and 1 is 2, sung by The Strangers with Mike Shannon. After releasing 3 albums and numerous singles in their native Zimbabwe, then called Rhodesia, Mike Shannon and his group The Diamonds relocated to London in 1964 in search of the big time. Their first recorded appearance in the UK was on a Decca compilation album titled Brumbeat, the Birmingham equivalent of Merseybeat. A short while later, whilst on tour in Germany, they came across a stranded Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, whose bus had broken down. The offer of a lift back to England may have been the event that led them into a contract with Epstein and Nems, where they quickly found themselves in the receipt of a unique Lennon and McCartney composition. Although credited to John and Paul, 1 and 1 is 2 was a Paul composition, which he had written specifically for Billy J. Kramer, who had rejected it, as had The Foremost. The final stages of its composition was witnessed by Michael Braun and written about in his book Love Me Do, The Beatles' Progress, where he finished his story about it with a quote from John, which said, "Billy J is finished when he gets this song." 1 and 1 is 2 was recorded at Philips Studios in Stanhope Place near Marble Arch and produced by one of pop's finest producers, Johnny Franz. An extremely talented man who also produced, among others, Dusty Springfield and the Walker Brothers. 1 and 1 is 2 was released on Philips on May 8, 1964, and received polite but muted reviews. Derek Johnson in the New Musical Express said that, on first playing, it didn't strike me as being one of the Beatles' best numbers. Don Short in Disc gave it 3 out of 5 stars and predicted probably not a wild hit, but a brisk beginning. Despite appearances on radio's Saturday Club and TV's Thank Your Lucky Stars, the single bombed, as did the career of The Strangers with Mike Shannon. Like Tip of My Tongue, it's not difficult to see why the Beatles gave this song away, and why John thought it would be a career ender for Billy J. As seasoned recording artists, Mike and his group gave the song their best shot, but it was simply too tame and the lyrics went nowhere. And as the saying goes, you can't make a silk purse out of a pig's ear. Like Dreamers Do was one of Paul's earliest and most important compositions, not to mention one he was especially proud of. Written in 1959 at the age of 16 at his home in Forth Lynn Road, it was one of the songs they chose to record at their Decca audition on January 1st, 1962. Also, Like Dreamers Do was the first Lennon-McCartney song the Beatles ever performed at the Cavern. It was a song which marked them out as not, like most Mersey groups at the time, just another covers band, but as something truly special. The Applejacks hailed from Birmingham and in April 1964 became the first group from that city to have a top 10 hit, with the Les Reed-Jeff Stevens composition Tell Me When. And it was while that single was riding high in the top 10 in April 1964 that they ran into the Beatles. The location for that meeting was Associated Rediffusion's TV studios in Wembley in northwest London, where the Beatles were doing final rehearsals for Around the Beatles, while the Applejacks were in another studio taping a performance of Tell Me When. Applejack band member Don Gould remembers Paul walking into their dressing room where they began chatting like old friends. "I think we've got a song for your next single," Paul said, and told Don to get in touch with Dick James to send him a demo, which he did a few days later. Like Tip of My Tongue, Like Dreamers Do had been among one of Paul's very early compositions, and was one which had always gone down well at the Cavern. In fact, it could be argued that Like Dreamers Do was the most important of their early songs, as it was the song that caught the attention of Kim Bennett and Sid Coleman at the publishing company Ardmore and Beechwood, which in turn led to their contract with Parlophone. Mike Leander, who had later arranged the strings on She's Leaving Home on Sgt. Pepper's, took charge of the musical direction for the Applejacks recording, which took place at Decca's studios in West Hampstead on April 20th, 1964. Ironically, the single's producer was Mike Smith, the same man who'd recorded the Beatles at their Decca audition, then had chosen to sign Brian Poole and the Tremolos over the Beatles. Mike Leander added piano to suit the Applejacks' signature sound, but otherwise they stuck close to the demo, which presumably was the Beatles recording from that Decca audition. The result was a bright, breezy and dynamic recording, which everyone thought would take them back into the top 10, or even surpass the success of Tell Me When. Released on Friday, June 5th, 1964, Like Dreamers Do was performed by the group on the TV show Ready Steady Go that very same day. This was followed up by an appearance on Top of the Pops on July the 8th.
I'll tell you the news is that the Animals are still at number one. We've got 3 new chart entries. Dusty's in, Cliff Richard's in, and the Applejacks are in with Like Dreamers Do.
Despite a sizable launch campaign and spending 11 weeks on the UK chart, Like Dreamers Do peaked at only number 20. It was released in the States on London on July the 6th, but sank without trace. This failure to make the top 10 took everybody by surprise, and after one more single in October, 3 Little Words, the Applejacks' chart career was over. Of course, these 3 songs were the exception to the rule, and as you may have already seen in our video from a few weeks ago, Paul wrote many big hits for other 60s artists. And if you haven't seen that, just click here or on the link in the description. And if you've enjoyed this one, why not give us a like and a sub? But that's all for this time, so I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.